Dr. Elena Vasquez stood at the back of the university auditorium, watching her 19-year-old niece Sofia accept her diploma with honors. The applause was thunderous, the pride palpable, but Elena remained invisible in the shadows, just as she had been for the past 8 years. Her own family, seated in the front rows, had no idea she was there. Why would they? According to them, she had disappeared into academic failure and personal disgrace, too ashamed to show her face at family gatherings. They whispered about her behind closed doors, the cautionary tale they used to motivate their children. The brilliant older sister who had crashed and burned, who couldn't finish her PhD, who had been quietly dismissed from the university for plagiarism allegations that were never quite explained. Elena had become their family's greatest disappointment, a reminder of what happens when potential meets poor character. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined, was that in 30 minutes, everything they believed about her would shatter in the most public way possible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Elena had always been the academic star of the Vasquez family. While her younger siblings played soccer and attended birthday parties, she spent weekends in libraries, her nose buried in research papers and theoretical frameworks that most adults couldn't comprehend. By age 16, she was taking graduate-level courses at the local university. By 22, she had earned her master's degree in theoretical mathematics with a focus on cryptographic algorithms. Her parents, Maria and Carlos, had bragged about her to everyone who would listen. Their eldest daughter, the genius, the one destined for greatness. The trouble began during her doctoral program at Princeton. Elena's research had caught the attention of some very unusual people, individuals who didn't work for universities or traditional research institutions. They approached her through her advisor, Dr. Patricia Huang, with an offer that came with more restrictions than explanations. The National Security Agency needed someone with her specific expertise in mathematical cryptography, someone who could develop algorithms so advanced that even the mention of them required security clearance. The work would be classified. Her name would be removed from published papers. She would disappear from the academic world entirely, working under pseudonyms and shell organizations for an indefinite period. Elena was 24 when she made the decision that would define the next decade of her life. She accepted the position, understanding that it meant sacrificing everything visible about her career for something she couldn't even describe to her family. The NSA arranged for her academic records to be sealed under national security provisions. Her doctoral advisor was instructed to report that she had withdrawn from the program due to personal issues. The university, bound by federal agreements they couldn't discuss, simply erased her presence from their systems. When Elena tried to explain to her family that she couldn't talk about her work, that it was classified, that she was still pursuing important research, they didn't believe her. How could they? She had no office to visit, no colleagues they could meet, no published papers with her name attached. Her father, Carlos, a proud man who had worked double shifts at the factory to pay for her education, felt betrayed. Her mother, Maria, who had shown Elena's academic achievements to every neighbor and church friend, felt humiliated. Her younger siblings, Luis and Carmen, watched their parents' disappointment transform into something colder. The final break came at Christmas dinner in 2015. Elena had just returned from 6 months in Geneva, where she had been working on international cybersecurity protocols with intelligence agencies from 12 different countries. She couldn't say that, of course. She couldn't explain why she looked tired, why she had missed Luis's wedding, or why she couldn't provide any concrete details about her life. When Carlos demanded to know what she was really doing with herself, when Maria accused her of lying about having any job at all, Elena sat in silence. The security oath she had taken was absolute. She couldn't defend herself without violating federal law. That night, her brother Luis took her aside. His voice was gentle but firm when he said, "Elena, we love you, but you need help. Whatever happened at Princeton, whatever you're going through, lying about it isn't helping anyone. Mom and Dad think you're on drugs or gambling or something worse. If you can't be honest with us, maybe you shouldn't come around until you figure your life out." Elena left that night and never returned. She moved across the country to a secure facility in Colorado, where she spent the next several years developing encryption systems that would protect financial networks, government communications, and international infrastructure from cyber attacks. Her work was revolutionary, but it existed only in classified documents and secure servers. Her mathematical proofs, which would have earned her multiple prestigious awards in the academic world, were labeled with code numbers instead of her name. Meanwhile, her family created their own narrative. Elena had cracked under pressure, they decided. She had always been too intense, too focused, too isolated. The plagiarism story emerged gradually, a whispered explanation that made sense to people who didn't understand how someone so brilliant could simply vanish. Carlos told people that the university had found irregularities in her research. Maria suggested that Elena had stolen ideas from other students. The story grew with each telling, becoming more elaborate and more damning. By 2018, Elena had become a cautionary tale at family gatherings. Parents used her as an example when talking to their children about humility, about the importance of character over intelligence. Her cousins were told not to be like Elena, who had let success go to her head and paid the price. Her own siblings stopped mentioning her name in conversations, as if she had died rather than simply disappeared. The irony was devastating. While her family spoke of her failure, Elena was briefing senators on cybersecurity threats. While they whispered about her disgrace, she was testifying before closed congressional committees about the vulnerabilities in America's digital infrastructure. While they used her as an example of wasted potential, she was quite literally helping to protect the country's most sensitive information systems. But Elena carried the weight of their disappointment like a stone in her chest. She had sacrificed her relationship with her family for work that she believed in, work that mattered, work that kept people safe. Yet there were nights when she wondered if it had been worth it. There were holidays when she sat alone in her secure apartment, knowing that somewhere across the country, her family was gathered around a dinner table, probably not even thinking of her. The breakthrough that would change everything came in late 2022. Elena's encryption algorithms had been so successful, so fundamentally important to national security infrastructure, that the Classification Review Board decided to partially declassify her work. It was an unprecedented move, but Elena's contributions had become too valuable to keep completely hidden. The mathematical frameworks she had developed were going to be taught in universities, published in academic journals, and presented at international conferences. Her real name would finally be attached to work that would reshape the field of cryptographic mathematics. Dr. Patricia Huang, Elena's former advisor who had maintained security clearance throughout Elena's classified work, reached out with news that felt surreal. Harvard University's Department of Mathematics wanted to offer Elena a full professorship. They wanted her to head their new cybersecurity mathematics initiative. They wanted her to teach graduate courses in cryptographic theory. The offer came with a salary that reflected the importance of her work, research funding that would allow her to continue developing new algorithms, and most importantly, the academic recognition that had been stolen from her for nearly a decade. But Elena almost turned it down. The thought of returning to academic life, of facing the questions and skepticism from people who might have heard her family's version of her story, felt overwhelming. She had grown accustomed to invisibility, to working in shadows, to being known only by security clearance numbers and project code names. It was Dr. Huang who convinced her otherwise. During a secure video call from her office at Princeton, she looked directly into the camera and said, "Elena, you've spent 8 years protecting this country's digital infrastructure. You've prevented cyber attacks that could have crippled our financial systems. You've developed mathematical proofs that will be studied for generations. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your service, but you do owe yourself the recognition you've earned." The decision to accept Harvard's offer coincided with another significant event, her niece Sofia's graduation from UCLA. Sofia was Maria and Carlos's granddaughter through Luis, the golden child of the new generation, following the family tradition of academic excellence. Elena hadn't seen Sofia since she was 11 years old, hadn't been invited to her quinceañera, her high school graduation, or any of the milestone moments that families typically share. But Elena decided to attend Sofia's college graduation anyway, not to confront her family, not to demand apologies or explanations, but simply to witness this moment of pride and accomplishment. She bought a plane ticket, reserved a hotel room, and prepared to remain invisible in the crowd, just another face among thousands of family members and friends celebrating their graduate.
What Elena didn't know was that Harvard's Dean of Mathematics, Dr. Michael Chen, would be attending the same ceremony. Sophia's academic advisor had connections to Harvard's graduate program, and Dr. Chen was there as a visiting speaker, delivering the commencement address to UCLA's mathematics and engineering graduates. He had Elena's classified file on his desk back in Cambridge, her research proposals for the Cybersecurity Mathematics Initiative, and a formal offer letter that would make her one of the highest-paid professors in Harvard's history.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
He also had no idea that the woman he was desperately trying to recruit was sitting quietly in the back row of the auditorium, watching her family celebrate a success they had never imagined she would witness. Elena sat in her rental car outside the UCLA campus for 20 minutes before the ceremony began, watching families stream through the parking lots with flowers, cameras, and proud smiles. She recognized some faces from a distance, cousins she hadn't seen in years, family friends who had once asked about her studies with genuine interest. Now they walked past her car without recognition, their conversations peppered with excitement about Sofia's achievements and plans for celebration dinners she wouldn't be attending. The decision to come had been impulsive, triggered by a LinkedIn notification that had appeared on her secure device 3 days earlier. Sofia had updated her profile with her graduation details, and somehow the algorithm had connected her to Elena's heavily protected account. Seeing her niece's photograph, older now and bearing a striking resemblance to Elena's younger self, had stirred something she thought she had buried years ago. The need to witness this moment, even from the shadows, had overwhelmed her carefully constructed emotional barriers. Elena had spent 8 years learning to compartmentalize feelings, to separate personal desires from professional obligations. In her line of work, emotional attachment was a liability. The algorithms she developed couldn't be compromised by sentiment, and the security protocols she followed left no room for personal relationships that might create vulnerabilities. But sitting in that parking lot, watching her family celebrate without her, she felt the full weight of what her sacrifice had cost. She entered the auditorium through a side door, choosing a seat in the far back corner where she could observe without being observed. The mathematics and engineering graduates were being honored in the first ceremony of the day, and Sofia was among the highest-ranking students in her class. Elena felt a surge of pride watching her niece cross the stage, followed immediately by a hollow ache when she realized she had missed every step of Sofia's journey to this moment. From her vantage point, Elena could see her parents in the third row. Maria wore a navy blue dress that Elena remembered from family weddings years ago, and Carlos had his phone out, recording every second of Sofia's moment on stage. Luis and his wife Carmen were beside them, beaming with the particular pride that comes from watching your child achieve something you once dreamed of yourself. They looked older, grayer, but fundamentally unchanged, still the family she had once belonged to, still the people she had protected through her silence. What Elena couldn't see from her position was the small commotion happening near the faculty seating area. Dr. Michael Chen, Harvard's Dean of Mathematics, was having an animated conversation with UCLA's Dean of Engineering, Dr. Sarah Martinez. Dr. Chen had been trying to reach Elena for weeks, leaving messages with her security liaison, sending formal communications through NSA channels, even reaching out to Dr. Patricia Huang at Princeton for assistance in making contact. Harvard's offer was time-sensitive, and Dr. Chen was growing concerned that Elena might not be interested in returning to academic life. Dr. Martinez knew Dr. Chen's frustration well. She had dealt with similar challenges when trying to recruit researchers who had worked in classified environments. The transition from secure facilities to open academic environments was often more difficult than people anticipated. Many brilliant scientists chose to remain in government work rather than face the scrutiny and exposure that came with university positions. Elena's name had come up in their conversation because Dr. Martinez had been reviewing the academic backgrounds of their graduating class. Sofia Vasquez had written her senior thesis on cryptographic applications in financial security systems, a topic that had impressed her professors with its sophistication and theoretical depth. When Dr. Martinez mentioned the project to Dr. Chen, he immediately recognized the mathematical framework Sofia had referenced.
They were variations of algorithms that appeared in Elena's classified research, mathematical concepts so advanced that very few people in the world could understand them, let alone teach them to undergraduate students. The connection was impossible to ignore. Either Sofia Vasquez was an extraordinary mathematical prodigy who had independently developed variations of Elena's work, or she had access to someone who understood Elena's research at a level that suggested direct involvement. Dr. Chen suspected the latter, and his curiosity about Sofia's academic influences had brought him to her graduation ceremony. Meanwhile, Elena remained unaware of the academic intrigue swirling around her niece's achievements. She was focused on something far more personal and painful. During the ceremony's intermission, she had overheard a conversation between two of her cousins that revealed the full extent of her family's narrative about her disappearance. "Remember when Elena used to be the smart one?" Cousin Patricia had whispered to her sister Rosa.
Mama still talks about what a shame it was, how she could have been anything she wanted. I heard she got caught cheating on her dissertation, Rosa replied. Louis doesn't like to talk about it, but Carmen told me the university found out she had been copying other people's work. That's why she never finished her degree. Elena's breath caught in her chest. The plagiarism story had evolved, become more specific and damning in the years since she had left. They weren't just saying she had failed, they were saying she had failed dishonestly, that her entire academic reputation had been built on stolen work. The irony was devastating. Elena's research was so original, so fundamentally groundbreaking, that it had required the highest levels of security classification. She hadn't stolen ideas. She had created mathematical concepts that would influence cryptography for decades to come. But there was more. As the ceremony continued, Elena overheard fragments of other conversations. Her aunt mentioning that Elena had probably gotten involved with drugs during graduate school. Her uncle suggesting that the academic pressure had caused some kind of mental breakdown. Her own mother, during a bathroom conversation Elena accidentally overheard, telling a family friend that she sometimes wondered if Elena was even alive, since they hadn't heard from her in so long. The casual cruelty of it hit Elena like a physical blow. Not only had they written her off as a failure, they had created an elaborate mythology around that failure. She had become their family's cautionary tale, a story they told to motivate younger relatives to avoid her mistakes. Every family gathering she had missed, every holiday celebration that had continued without her, had apparently included discussions of her disgrace and disappearance. Elena left the auditorium during the final round of applause, walking quickly toward her rental car as families began to gather for post-ceremony celebrations. She needed air, space, time to process what she had learned about the narrative her family had constructed around her absence. The parking lot was filled with laughter and congratulations, groups of people planning dinner reservations and celebration parties. She moved through the crowd like a ghost, invisible and unrecognized. But as she reached her car, Elena made a decision that would change everything. Instead of driving directly back to the airport, instead of disappearing once again into the classified world where her work was valued but her name remained hidden, she pulled out her secure phone and dialed Dr. Patricia Huang's number. "Elena?" Dr. Huang's voice carried surprise and concern. "How are you? I've been getting calls from Harvard about their offer. Dr. Chen is very eager to speak with you." "I want to accept the position," Elena said without preamble. "The full professorship, the research initiative, all of it. But I have one condition." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What kind of condition?" Elena looked back toward the campus, where her family was probably gathering for photographs and celebration meals she would never be part of, where her niece was beginning her own journey into the academic world that had once been Elena's home, where a young woman was being celebrated for work that built upon mathematical foundations Elena herself had created. "I want the declassification process to be public. I want my name associated with my research in every academic database, every journal publication, every conference presentation. I want it documented that my work has been protecting this country's infrastructure for 8 years. And I want it announced that Harvard is hiring me specifically because of the mathematical frameworks I developed while working for the NSA."
Dr. Huang was quiet for a long moment. Elena, that's a significant request. The publicity will be intense. There will be questions about your years away from academia, speculation about your work, possibly even criticism from people who don't understand the nature of classified research. Elena thought about her family's whispered conversations, about the stories they had told about her character and her failures.
She thought about Sofia's senior thesis, which had used mathematical concepts Elena had developed in a secure facility while her family believed she was unemployed and disgraced. She thought about the years of silence, of protecting people who had never hesitated to betray her memory. "I understand the risks," Elena said, "but I'm tired of being invisible. I'm tired of protecting people who turned my sacrifice into their story of disappointment. I want the record corrected." Dr. Huang sighed, but there was approval in her voice. "I'll make the calls. Harvard will be thrilled, and the NSA owes you this much recognition. Your work has been too important to keep hidden forever anyway. When do you want to make the announcement?" Elena looked at her watch. It was just past noon. Her family would be at lunch now, probably at the restaurant where they had celebrated Elena's own graduations years ago, back when she was still part of their story. Sofia would be the center of attention, fielding questions about her future plans and graduate school applications. "Tomorrow," Elena said. "I want the press release to go out tomorrow morning. Make sure it includes the specific mathematical frameworks I developed, the applications to national cybersecurity infrastructure, and the fact that Harvard is creating an entirely new department around my research." As she ended the call, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not revenge, not anger, but the quiet satisfaction of truth preparing to surface. Her family had spent 8 years creating their version of her story. Tomorrow, the world would learn the actual version. And somewhere in Los Angeles, a brilliant young woman who had unknowingly built her senior thesis on her aunt's groundbreaking work was about to discover that the family failure she had heard whispered about for years was actually one of the most important mathematicians of her generation. The press release went live at exactly 8 in the morning Pacific time, simultaneously published by Harvard University, the National Security Agency, and the Department of Defense. The headline read, "Harvard Mathematics Department welcomes Dr. Elena Vasquez, developer of revolutionary cybersecurity algorithms that protected national infrastructure for 8 years." The announcement detailed her classified work, her mathematical breakthroughs, and the new cybersecurity mathematics initiative she would be leading at one of the world's most prestigious universities. Dr. Michael Chen had been waiting for this moment for weeks. Within minutes of the press release, his phone began ringing with calls from academic journals, news outlets, and mathematics departments around the globe. Elena's work, now partially declassified, was already being hailed as a fundamental advancement in cryptographic theory. The algorithms she had developed didn't just protect government systems. They had applications in banking, healthcare, international communications, and digital infrastructure that billions of people relied on daily. But Dr. Chen had a more immediate concern. According to Dr. Patricia Huang, Elena was somewhere in Los Angeles, and he needed to find her before she changed her mind about returning to academic life. The transition from classified work to university teaching was notoriously difficult, and many former government researchers struggled with the shift from absolute secrecy to open collaboration. Harvard couldn't afford to lose someone of Elena's caliber to cold feet or second thoughts. Elena woke up in her hotel room to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The secure phone she carried for NSA communications was buzzing with congratulatory messages from colleagues whose names she couldn't share and supervisors whose existence was classified. Her personal phone, which she rarely used, was flooded with notifications from news apps, LinkedIn updates, and voicemails from reporters asking for interviews. The magnitude of the response surprised her. She had expected some academic interest, perhaps a few articles in specialized mathematics journals. She hadn't anticipated that major news networks would pick up the story, that financial markets would respond positively to news of strengthened cybersecurity infrastructure, or that her work would trend on social media platforms, where people were sharing articles about the hidden mathematician who kept America's secrets safe. Elena's first instinct was to retreat, to check out of the hotel and disappear back into the classified world where she understood the rules and expectations. But as she scrolled through the news coverage, she realized something important was happening.
For the first time in 8 years, her work was being discussed openly, evaluated on its merits, celebrated for its impact. The comment sections of news articles were filled with people expressing gratitude for her service, mathematics students discussing the elegance of her proofs, and cybersecurity professionals explaining how her algorithms had protected systems they worked on daily. Meanwhile, across town, Elena's family was experiencing their own morning of revelation. Luis had been preparing for work when Carmen burst into their bedroom, laptop in hand, her face pale with shock.
She had been checking her news feed over coffee when Elena's photograph appeared on her screen, accompanied by a headline that made no sense given everything they believed they knew about Elena's life. "Luis," Carmen whispered, her voice barely audible, "you need to see this." The article she showed him detailed Elena's classified career, her mathematical achievements, and Harvard's unprecedented offer. But what struck Luis most was the photograph. Elena looked older, more serious than he remembered, but she was wearing a professional blazer and standing in front of mathematical equations that looked impossibly complex. This wasn't the image of failure his family had carried for years. This was the photograph of someone who had spent nearly a decade working at the highest levels of national security. Luis read the article twice, then called his parents. Maria answered on the first ring, her voice cheerful with plans for Sofia's graduation celebration dinner that evening. Her tone changed completely when Luis started reading sections of the press release aloud. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Luis thought the call had dropped. "That can't be right," Maria finally said. "Elena dropped out of graduate school. She couldn't handle the pressure. The university said she had problems with her research." But even as she spoke, Maria was pulling up the news coverage on her own computer. Elena's face stared back at her from multiple websites, accompanied by headlines that contradicted everything the family had believed. Mathematics professors were being quoted about the groundbreaking nature of her work. National security experts were explaining how her algorithms had prevented cyber attacks that could have devastated the economy. Harvard's president was describing Elena as one of the most important mathematical minds of her generation. Carlos took the phone from Maria, his engineering background helping him understand the technical descriptions of Elena's work better than his wife could. As he read about cryptographic algorithms and cybersecurity infrastructure, he began to grasp the magnitude of what Elena had been doing during her years of absence. The mathematical concepts described in the articles were beyond anything he had encountered in his decades of industrial engineering, but he could recognize their sophistication and importance. "She was never unemployed," he said quietly to Maria. "She was working for the government. She couldn't tell us because it was classified." The weight of that realization hit them both simultaneously. Elena hadn't failed or disappeared in disgrace. She had been recruited for work so sensitive that acknowledging her existence would have compromised national security. Their brilliant daughter had been serving her country in a way they had never imagined, while they told everyone who would listen that she had wasted her potential. Dr. Chen found Elena in the hotel restaurant, where she was attempting to eat breakfast while fielding calls from reporters and academic colleagues. He recognized her immediately from the photographs in her classified file, though she looked more uncertain than he had expected. The woman who had briefed senators and developed algorithms that protected critical infrastructure was nervously stirring her coffee and checking her phone every few seconds. "Dr. Vasquez," he said, approaching her table with the confidence of someone accustomed to recruiting top talent. "I'm Michael Chen from Harvard. I've been trying to reach you for weeks." Elena looked up, startled. She had been expecting this conversation, but not in a hotel restaurant in Los Angeles. Dr. Chen's presence meant the offer was real, that Harvard genuinely wanted her despite the unconventional path her career had taken. "Dr. Chen," she replied, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "I assume you've seen the morning news." "The entire academic world has seen the morning news," he said, sitting down with obvious excitement. "Elena, your work is extraordinary. The applications alone are going to revolutionize how we think about digital security. But what interests me most is your teaching potential. We want you to train the next generation of cryptographic mathematicians."
Elena considered this. Teaching had always been part of her long-term career goals,
But 8 years of classified work had made her forget the satisfaction of sharing knowledge openly. The idea of standing in front of a classroom, explaining mathematical concepts without security restrictions, felt both terrifying and exhilarating. "There's something you should know," Elena said carefully. "My family is here in Los Angeles. They're probably reading about my work for the first time right now. For 8 years, they've believed I was a failure who dropped out of graduate school in disgrace. They created an entire narrative about my character and my career that's completely false." Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Classified work often creates those kinds of misunderstandings. Families rarely comprehend the nature of the sacrifice when someone disappears into government service. But that's behind you now. Harvard wants to give you the recognition and platform you deserve. Elena's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was one she hadn't seen in years, Lewis's cell phone. She stared at it for a moment, then declined the call. Almost immediately, it rang again, this time from her mother's number. Then Carmen. Then Sofia. "They know," Elena said simply. "The news coverage must have reached them." Dr. Chen understood the complexity of the situation immediately. Elena's return to academic life wasn't just about accepting a job offer. It was about reclaiming an identity that had been buried under years of necessary secrecy and family misunderstanding. The timing of the press release, coinciding with her presence at Sofia's graduation, created an opportunity for resolution that might never come again. "Elena," he said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine conviction, "Harvard doesn't just want you because of your research, though it's remarkable. We want you because you represent something important about the relationship between academic excellence and public service. Your work protected millions of people who will never know your name. That kind of dedication deserves to be recognized and emulated." Elena's phone rang again. This time it was Dr. Patricia Huang, probably calling with updates about the media response and administrative details about her transition to Harvard. But there was another call waiting, one that made Elena's breath catch. Sofia's number appeared on her screen, followed by a text message that contained just 4 words. "Aunt Elena, is it true?" For 8 years, Elena had protected her family from the truth of her work and her sacrifice. She had allowed them to believe in her failure rather than compromise the security of operations that kept people safe. But now, as she sat across from Harvard's Dean of Mathematics in a hotel restaurant where her family was probably planning their celebration dinner, Elena realized that the truth had finally caught up with all of them. She looked at Dr. Chen and smiled for the first time in years. "When do you need an answer about the position?" "The sooner the better," he replied. "But Elena, I have a feeling you've already decided." Elena picked up her phone and scrolled to Sofia's text message. Her niece, the brilliant young woman who had unknowingly built her senior thesis on Elena's mathematical foundations, deserved to know the truth about her family's hidden genius. They all did. "I accept Harvard's offer," Elena said, "but first, I have a graduation dinner to attend." The restaurant Elena's family had chosen for Sofia's celebration was the same Italian place where they had gathered for every major milestone over the past decade. Elena knew this because she had driven past it countless times during her rare visits to Los Angeles, always wondering what conversations were happening inside, what achievements were being toasted, what stories were being shared in her absence. Now, standing in the parking lot at 6:30 in the evening, she could see them through the large windows that faced the street. They were seated at their usual large table near the back, Sofia glowing in a white sundress that made her look impossibly young and accomplished. Lewis and Carmen flanked their daughter, pride radiating from every gesture as they showed her photographs on their phones and gestured animatedly about her future plans. Maria sat across from Sofia, her hands moving as she spoke, probably sharing stories about Sofia's childhood brilliance and academic dedication. Carlos occupied the head of the table, his engineering mind likely analyzing Sofia's job prospects and graduate school options with the same precision he brought to structural calculations. Elena watched them for several minutes, noting how the dynamics had shifted over the years she had been absent.
Lewis had grown into the role of family patriarch, making decisions and guiding conversations with an authority their father was gradually ceding to him. Sofia held the position Elena had once occupied, the academic star whose achievements reflected well on the entire family's commitment to education and excellence. They looked complete, settled into roles and relationships that had no empty spaces where Elena might have belonged. Her phone had been ringing continuously since the press release went live. 12 missed calls from Lewis, 8 from her mother, 15 from Sofia, and dozens more from cousins, family friends, and relatives she hadn't spoken to in years. The voicemails she had listened to revealed a range of reactions, from confusion to disbelief to what sounded like desperate attempts to reconcile the Elena they had dismissed with the Dr. Elena Vasquez being celebrated in national news coverage. Dr. Chen had offered to accompany her to the dinner, recognizing that Elena's family confrontation could affect her decision about Harvard's position. But Elena had declined. This conversation needed to happen without witnesses, without the pressure of impressing her future employer or managing external expectations. After 8 years of silence, she owed her family an explanation delivered on her terms. Elena entered the restaurant through the main entrance, walking directly toward their table without stopping at the hostess station. She had timed her arrival perfectly, appearing just as they were finishing their main courses but before dessert and coffee had been served. The moment Lewis spotted her approaching, his face transformed from casual conversation to stunned recognition. He said something urgent to the rest of the table, causing heads to turn in Elena's direction, with expressions ranging from shock to something approaching fear. Sofia was the first to stand, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor as she moved toward Elena with the impulsive energy of someone who had spent hours processing impossible information. The young woman who had been celebrated all day for her academic achievements suddenly looked uncertain, as if the arrival of her mysterious aunt had shifted the fundamental assumptions underlying her family's narrative. "Aunt Elena," Sofia said, her voice carrying a mixture of awe and confusion, "we saw the news. We read about Harvard, about your work with the government. Is it real? Did you really spend 8 years working for the NSA?" Elena nodded, her eyes moving past Sofia to take in the faces of family members she hadn't seen in nearly a decade. Maria looked older, more fragile than Elena remembered, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the stress lines that had deepened around her eyes. Carlos appeared to have shrunk somehow, his broad shoulders less imposing than they had been during Elena's childhood. Lewis watched her with the wariness of someone trying to process information that contradicts fundamental beliefs about reality. "It's real," Elena said simply, "all of it. The classified work, the mathematical research, Harvard's offer to head their new cybersecurity department. I've been developing encryption algorithms that protect banking systems, government communications, and critical infrastructure. My work has prevented cyber attacks that could have shut down power grids and compromised financial networks across the country." The silence that followed her words was different from the comfortable family chatter that had filled the restaurant moments earlier. This was the silence of people confronting the magnitude of their misunderstanding, the weight of years spent believing and perpetuating a story that was not only false but cruel in its implications about Elena's character. Carmen spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "But the university said you had problems with your research. They said you withdrew from the doctoral program because of academic irregularities." Elena's jaw tightened slightly. The fabricated story of her disgrace had become so entrenched in family lore that even confronted with contradictory evidence, they were struggling to abandon their version of events. She had expected this resistance, but experiencing it directly still stung with the force of accumulated betrayal. "The university was required to say that," Elena explained, her voice remaining steady despite the emotional undertow she felt building in her chest. "My work was classified under national security provisions. When the NSA recruited me, all records of my research had to be sealed. The university couldn't acknowledge what I was actually doing without violating federal security protocols." Lewis leaned forward, his engineering background helping him grasp the technical implications faster than the others. "You mean when you said your work was classified, when you couldn't tell us details about your job, you were telling the truth?"
The question hung in the air like an accusation, though Elena wasn't sure whether Luis was accusing her of deception or the family of willful blindness. She had indeed told them her work was classified, repeatedly, during the few conversations they had shared before her final disappearance from family gatherings. But they had chosen to interpret her inability to provide details as evidence of unemployment, drug addiction, or mental instability, rather than consider the possibility that she was telling the truth about government work requiring secrecy. I was telling the truth about everything, Elena said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. When I missed Louis's wedding, I was in Geneva working with international cybersecurity teams to prevent attacks on financial networks in 12 countries. When I couldn't come to Christmas dinner 3 years in a row, I was stationed at secure facilities developing encryption systems that protect the communications between military units in combat zones. When you decided I was unemployed and unstable, I was briefing congressional committees about vulnerabilities in America's digital infrastructure. Maria's face had gone completely white, her hand trembling as she reached for her water glass. The proud grandmother who had spent the day celebrating Sofia's academic achievements was confronting the reality that she had spent years telling people her eldest daughter was a failure, a cautionary tale, a disappointment who couldn't handle the pressures of advanced education. "We didn't know," Maria whispered. "Elena, we didn't know." But Elena had spent 8 years processing the pain of their assumptions, the casual cruelty of their dismissal, the ease with which they had written her off as a person of poor character who had wasted her potential. The phrase, "we didn't know," felt insufficient to address the magnitude of what they had done to her reputation and their relationship. "You didn't want to know," Elena corrected, her voice carrying the weight of accumulated hurt despite her efforts to remain composed. "I told you my work was classified. I explained that I couldn't discuss details. Instead of trusting me, instead of believing in the person you raised, you created a story about my failure that was easier for you to accept than the possibility that I was succeeding in ways you couldn't understand or control." Sofia had been listening to this exchange with growing comprehension, her brilliant mind making connections that were apparently eluding the adults at the table. She pulled out her phone and opened what appeared to be her senior thesis, scrolling through pages of mathematical equations and theoretical frameworks. "And Elena," Sofia said, her voice filled with a mixture of excitement and disbelief, "I wrote my entire senior project on cryptographic applications using mathematical frameworks that I found in academic databases. The algorithms I based my research on, they're attributed to someone identified only as EV in classified NSA publications. That was you, wasn't it? I've been studying your work for months without knowing it." Elena looked at her niece's thesis, recognizing immediately the mathematical concepts Sofia had explored. They were indeed variations of algorithms Elena had developed during her second year of classified work, theoretical frameworks that had been partially declassified for academic study but never attributed to their original creator until today's press release. "Yes," Elena said, feeling something shift in her chest as she saw her own mathematical innovations being used by her brilliant niece. "Those are my algorithms. You've been building on mathematical foundations I created while this family was telling everyone I was too unstable to hold a job." The impact of this revelation on Carlos was immediate and visible. As an engineer, he could recognize the sophistication of the mathematical concepts Sofia had used in her thesis. If Elena had developed those frameworks years ago while working in classified environments, it meant she had been operating at a level of mathematical innovation that few people in the world could match. His daughter hadn't been wasting her potential in shame and failure. She had been protecting national security using mathematical genius he had never fully comprehended. Dr. Michael Chen's timing was, Elena realized later, either perfectly orchestrated or remarkably coincidental. He appeared at their table just as the family was beginning to process the full implications of Elena's revelations, his presence adding an additional layer of external validation to her story. The dean of mathematics from Harvard University didn't seek out failures or frauds for faculty positions. Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Chen said, approaching the table with the confident demeanor of someone accustomed to academic negotiations. "I hope I'm not interrupting a private celebration, but I wanted to confirm that our conversation this afternoon concluded satisfactorily. Harvard is very excited about the announcement we'll be making tomorrow regarding your appointment." The silence that greeted Dr. Chen's words was profound.
Elena's family stared at him as if he were speaking a foreign language, trying to process the reality that Harvard's dean of mathematics was treating their family failure as a distinguished colleague worthy of academic respect and professional courtship. Elena introduced Dr. Chen to her family, watching their faces as they shook hands with someone who clearly regarded her as one of the most important mathematical minds of her generation. Sofia asked intelligent questions about Harvard's cybersecurity program that impressed Dr. Chen and demonstrated her genuine understanding of Elena's work. Lewis inquired about the transition from classified research to university teaching, revealing his growing comprehension of what Elena had actually been doing during her years of absence.
But it was Maria's reaction that struck Elena most powerfully. Her mother sat quietly throughout the conversation with Dr. Chen, tears streaming down her face as she listened to him describe Elena's mathematical contributions and their applications to national security. The woman who had spent 8 years telling people her daughter couldn't handle graduate school was hearing Harvard's dean explain why Elena's work would be taught in universities for generations to come. When Dr. Chen excused himself to return to his hotel, promising to send Elena additional details about her faculty appointment and research funding, the family was left alone with the weight of their reconstructed understanding of Elena's life and achievements. The daughter they had mourned as a failure was being recruited by Harvard. The sister they had dismissed as mentally unstable had been protecting the country's most critical digital infrastructure. The aunt Sofia had never known was the mathematician whose work had influenced her own academic research. Elena looked around the table at faces that were processing years of misplaced shame, misdirected concern, and fundamentally incorrect assumptions about her character and capabilities. She felt no satisfaction in their discomfort, no vindication in their obvious regret. What she felt was exhaustion, the deep weariness that comes from carrying a truth too heavy to share for too long. "I accept your apologies," Elena said quietly, "but I want you to understand what the cost has been. I missed 8 years of being your daughter, your sister, your aunt. I celebrated no birthdays, attended no graduations, shared no holidays. I protected all of you from questions about my work and my absence, and you repaid that protection by turning my sacrifice into a story of personal failure that you shared with everyone who would listen." The truth of what she had lost and what they had cost her through their assumptions and gossip settled over the table like a weight that would take years to lift. 6 months later, Dr. Elena Vasquez stood at the front of Harvard's largest lecture hall, addressing an auditorium filled with graduate students, faculty members, and visiting scholars from around the world. Her inaugural lecture, titled Mathematics in Service, Cryptographic Innovation for National Security, had drawn attendees from MIT, Princeton, Stanford, and universities across 3 continents. The mathematical frameworks she presented weren't just theoretical concepts, they were proven systems that had protected critical infrastructure and prevented cyber attacks that could have devastated global economies. In the third row, Sofia sat with her notebook open, frantically taking notes as her aunt explained algorithmic concepts that would form the foundation of Sofia's own doctoral research at Harvard. The young woman had transferred from her original graduate program specifically to study under Elena, determined to build upon the mathematical legacy she had unknowingly inherited. Their relationship had blossomed into something deeper than family obligation. It had become an academic mentorship that promised to produce the next generation of cybersecurity innovations. Elena's parents attended the lecture via live stream from their home in Los Angeles. Maria had printed and framed every news article about Elena's work, creating a wall display that replaced the family photos she had removed years earlier. Carlos had purchased textbooks on cryptographic mathematics, determined to understand his daughter's contributions even if the concepts challenged his engineering background. They sent flowers to Elena's office every week, small gestures that acknowledged the magnitude of what they had lost through their assumptions and what they hoped to rebuild through patient effort. The transformation in Elena's life extended beyond professional recognition. She had purchased a house near campus, filled it with books and comfortable furniture, and created the kind of home she had dreamed of during her years in secure facilities. Graduate students gathered there for informal seminars, discussing theoretical problems over coffee and homemade dinner.
Elena had rediscovered the joy of sharing knowledge openly, of building academic relationships based on intellectual curiosity rather than security clearances. Dr. Chen often remarked that Elena's appointment had elevated Harvard's entire mathematics department. Her research funding had attracted brilliant minds from around the globe. Her courses had wait lists extending for semesters, and her published papers were being cited in journals across multiple disciplines. But more importantly, Elena had brought something intangible to the academic community, the understanding that true brilliance sometimes requires sacrifice, that the most important work is often invisible, and that recognition, when it finally comes, is sweetest when earned through years of quiet dedication. Elena's story had become more than personal vindication. It had become a testament to the mathematicians, scientists, and researchers who served their country in shadows, protecting systems and lives without seeking public acclaim. She received letters from other classified researchers whose families had misunderstood their absence, whose contributions remained hidden behind security protocols. Her visibility had given voice to their sacrifices and dignity to their choices. As she concluded her lecture to thunderous applause, Elena looked out at the faces of students and colleagues who saw her not as someone who had disappeared in disgrace, but as someone who had emerged from necessary secrecy to share knowledge that would shape the future of digital security. She had reclaimed her narrative, restored her reputation, and rebuilt her relationships on her own terms. The woman who had once been invisible by necessity was now impossible to ignore, and the recognition she received was not just professional, but deeply personal. She was finally, completely, undeniably herself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.